that historically this book of Matthew is written to an audience that is predominantly Hebrew. They've been taught the Mosaic law. They understand of the person of Abraham as the father of the Jewish nation. They see Moses as the great lawgiver. They've experienced and heard some of the historical stories of prophets, the Nabis, and they understand that these were spokespersons who had been given the assignment to fulfill and to share the promise with the people who had all of a sudden began to think that maybe the promise is never going to be fulfilled. They've heard stories where there were individuals who had come along and they had suggested that they were the Messiah. Other individuals had come along and they had worked magic and tricks in a seductive way so that somehow they could convince these people that they were the hope, only to discover that these great pretenders were individuals who really were not the one. Now, of all the things that happens in the New Testament, Jesus is maneuvering his way into human society in such a way that no one else would expect him. He doesn't show up on the affluent side of the gate, or he's not an individual who appears to be born among opulence, and he's not someone who appears to have a great deal. He doesn't seem to come from a family that has a great deal of prominence and power, but rather he's from the other side of the track. He's not born with a silver spoon in his hand, has not been given just absolutely everything that he desires. His daddy didn't give him an inherited $1 million to get started.
That's right.
He's from the other side of the fence. He's from that little town of Nazareth that is more like a ghetto of the day. It was a place where those who were just common folks meandered through the streets and made their way in life. Lo and behold, according to Matthew, there is one particular young sister. She has somehow been impregnated. There is something miraculous about the text because it's outside of the norm. She's been waiting a whole year, going through the betrothal, the time when they spend in preparation for the great wedding event. She has spent most of the year just waiting and doing what she was supposed to do. The tradition was that whenever a male and a female came together to be married, that indeed they were to wait 1 year before it was pronounced technically as a marriage. So they couldn't consummate what had happened until after the year. I'm just trying to get to the point. For somehow the history has it that this particular event is marred. It's marred by the fact that this female somehow becomes pregnant without the assistance of Joseph. Now, you know as well as I do, this is not going to set well. It's not going to go very well with a brother when you discover that the lady that you have been betrothed to for the last year, and you both have waited this period of time to make sure that you could consummate this wedding together. But before the time comes, it appears that there appears to be some infidelity that has taken place in the relationship. Now wait a minute. I don't care what you say, your human side would suggest to you that somebody has been unfaithful. Somebody in this relationship has done something outside of the norm of the marriage vow. Now don't forget that historically, whenever the wedding was to be put together, the parents may have been the ones who decided who was going to marry who. If the year period is designed in such a way so that it gave an opportunity for the sister, just in case she decided this was not the one she wanted to marry, it allowed her an opportunity to make the decisions. But in this text, the sister is pregnant. The miraculous piece in the text is that she doesn't realize that her pregnancy indeed is something that's not just going to bless her, but it's going to be a blessing to all of humanity. I'm just talking about the promise of a lifetime. And you know as well as I do that there are many times when we make promises, don't we? I remember as a Cub Scout, we stood and we made a promise to God and our country. Yeah. Those of you who serve in the armed forces, you recognize that there's promises that you've made. But some of you who serve as Girl Scouts, there were promises that you took to be faithful both to God and your country. And then there are some of you who promised, that special someone in your life that you'd be faithful to them and you would love them. And then there are those of you who have been married and you stood before a congregation and before your friends and some of your enemies and you made a promise to be faithful until death do you part. I'm just trying to help you to understand that we have a tendency to make some promises that inevitably sometimes we don't keep. But according to the biblical text, God has made a promise to humanity. And God is not like us. He cannot lie. God is incapable of going against his own word. If he says a thing, he's going to fulfill it. And so let's go back for just a moment past the New Testament, back to the Old Testament when God spoke and humanity listened. He spoke to humankind. He gave directives to the prophets who were the spokesperson on his behalf. You do understand that whenever the prophets were given the word from God, their assignment was to take the word of God to humanity. And when they delivered the word of God to humanity, it was humanity's responsibility to follow through and to do what God had commanded of them. And God, even then, when humanity had messed up and had blown it, God said, I'm going to make a promise with you. Oh, by the way, I'll never destroy the earth again by the flood. And I'll always work to get you back. And so from every one of the prophets that you find in the Old Testament, God is attempting to work it out. Which brings us to Matthew in the New Testament, when the Hebrews are trying to get a grip on to understand this great promise that God has given. And so in the Greek sense, the text would suggest that God says he's going to send Jesus. Now that's difficult for some of them because they are still Hebrews. And so he gives them phraseology that may be helpful. So he says to them, I'm going to send you Emmanuel. And so there is a phrase that's familiar to all of humankind, even the Hebrews. He says, I'm going to send to you Yahshua. And Yahshua, according to the Hebrew, literally means Jehovah is salvation. And so the Holy Spirit conceives in Mary, and Mary has a baby boy. His name is to be called Emmanuel, which means God saves all of us from our sins. And so from the promise in the book of Genesis, the very beginning, God is working to fulfill his promise so that when it's all said and done, even now on this Christmas season, God says, I'm coming down to you. So that ultimately you might be saved from your own sins. And so sometimes we are so busy trying to fulfill some earthly promise, trying to wrap it up somehow, but the greatest gift that God ever offered to us was his son whom he loved dearly. The greatest promise is that God has promised to save us from us. My worst enemy is me. The challenge that you face is the one that you presented in your life. You are struggling with issues, we are struggling with issues and challenges because of the stuff that we put before us. And God has given us a promise that even when we've blown it, when we've messed up, he says, I'm going to send my son into a sin-cursed world, knowing all that he knew, in that while we were yet sinners, he died on our behalf. Knowing all he knew about me, he still fulfilled his promise. And the good news today is that God still loves us in spite of our stuff. You know all that you know about you, and God is still saying, I'm sending you a Savior in the midst of your situation to deliver you from all that you've done and that you are experiencing. The promise is the greatest promise. That God loves us. In spite of us. And the Holy Spirit has come to comfort us. Stand with me, please.